Hey everyone, my name's Griffin Morris from Spatial. I lead growth and product strategy. We're going to get started with the webinar here. Apologies if you hear some like music and drums in the background. Our office in Cincinnati, there's a parade going on outside. And it's kind of coming through the into the office, so you might be hearing some loud noises as we go along. A little background on the company. Spatial was started by a group of social scientists and data engineers around this idea of how can we create a layer of location intelligence that's driven by actual human behavior, and then allow that layer to be used by any type of business for location-related decision making. We wanted to host this webinar so we could take you through how Spatial works with retailers and restaurants. We work with a lot of retailers and restaurants, and specifically the real estate teams, on what their current brick and mortar location strategy is. Companies are going through some different transitions. We all know that the industry is changing. E-commerce is forcing the industry to change and adapt. But more stores still opened last year than closed. So certainly brick and mortar is strong. It just needs to adapt the strategy. And at Spatial, we want to help companies get closer to their ideal customer in their location strategy and no longer have to rely as much on heavy marketing to pull people from far away to come to your store. How can we put your stores in the perfect social contextual spot for your brand? Here's the solution that we've developed. So at Spatial, we now pull in data from many different sources, mostly social media. So things like Twitter and Instagram. We're looking at the conversations people are having and where they're having them. And then we use some different techniques from artificial intelligence and machine learning and data science to make this all usable information. So specifically, how does this work for retailers? So what are the tools that you have at hand to understand a community right now? You have your demographic data. This can tell you population, income, generally the types of people in an area. Surveys, we actually have some people in our company that come from this qualitative survey-based research, and the problems are always the same. It's difficult to get people to participate, and you can only get answers to the questions you think to ask. It's not an organic layer of information that people are freely giving. In the last 5 years, we've had some great sources of movement and traffic data become available. So now we can finally understand how are people moving throughout a community, and what does that look like? And that's really useful. But still, even with all these sources of information, it paints a pretty black and white picture of a community. There's no way to really understand what are the people's interests in this area, what types of behaviors do they engage in, and what are their personalities. And we work with some of our customers have talked about, they'll send the real estate team to a new prospective store, and they'll have to stay there for a whole week just trying to figure out the types of people in the area and make their best guess at, is this the right type of people for us? But there's no data-driven way to approach this problem until Spatial. So what we do with all of our social data is we turn it into segments of actual behaviors and personas. So things like hipster, nightlife experience, nature lovers, all these different behaviors, and we have over 550 different segments of this, we can measure for any single community across the entire US and even international markets. And so then what that gives you is a tool alongside these other sources of information on actual behavioral data that can be used as a part of any analysis, whether that's identifying where to open up a new store. For some clients, it's trying to make the most of their existing stores or even where they have to close stores. We'll take you through an example of how this can be applied to retail. So we recently did a research project around Payless, and Payless went through bankruptcy and they closed a lot of stores last year. And we looked at 400 locations that were closed, And we compared the different social data around those stores to the stores that were successful and could stay open, even a couple miles away from the ones that were closed. And we found that we could actually predict if a Payless location was going to overperform and stay open or underperform and need to be closed with an 82% degree of accuracy. Specifically, there were segments around do-it-yourselfers, show-offs, and feminine that were really good for Payless performance. When they were in communities where those segments of our data were really high, around a 1 mile radius of that store, it was likely to stay open. But when they were located near segments like Sweet Tooth, urban fashion, and problem solvers, that store was probably going to close, and they should avoid opening stores in those communities in the future. Part of our deliverable for any project that we do with a retailer or restaurant, we create these really qualitative insights that are data-driven around what types of personalities are good and bad. So again, when people are talking about princess and clothing in an area, that's really good for Payless stores. And that's probably not a surprise to them either. But there was never a way to accurately measure this type of behavior in a consistent way across any city. And then on the other side, when people are interested in urban fashion, which is a specific segment that has money to spend on fashion and spends a lot of money on clothes, it was still negative for Payless because the discount shoe sales simply didn't resonate with this group as a message for them. So that's the who type of insights, but then we also give you the where. All of our data is location based. So down to the block level, we can give you heat maps and scores for all of these segments and their relevance to you. The best decision tool that we give to retailers to make these new location decisions is our reports. So we summarize all of our 550 segments into a single score that tells you, is this site, if we open a store here, going to overperform? And the example report on the screen is one where the store would be expected to overperform, or is it going to underperform? And the completely quantitative analysis that we deliver that you can use as a part of your decisions. So it summarizes all of those qualitative type information into specific metrics that make it really simple to make a decision. And we're actually today, after the webinar, if you send us an address, and it can be an existing store that you have and you want to understand the community better, or it could be a new location that you're considering opening, if you send us that address, we'll create a custom free report that outlines the top 10 segments and behaviors in that community and an understanding of how those segments might impact your business. And so now we're going to do a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to add them in the chat, and we'll go ahead and answer them.
Hey, Griffin. So we do have one question. Looks like they're out of Toledo. First question is, why is social media data so important now when they have other types of data and so many other sources that you mentioned?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question, and definitely something that we get a lot from our customers. The information that social media captures is something that we've really always wanted to be able to understand in a community. So we've always wanted to know, when looking at a location, what are the behaviors and personalities here? Those are the types of things that anyone in marketing will tell you are important for your business and to understand how you can sell your product. But really, until social media became widely used and also the data became accessible by companies like us, could we tap into this layer of information and finally understand it across locations. So the information that's present in social media has always been what we've wanted to have to make these types of decisions. And thankfully now there actually is a source that can tell us what are people in a community talking about.
Awesome. So another question here, which I think we hear quite a bit. So not everyone is on social media, as you know. How do you know your stories and predictions are accurate to those? It looks like they're implying kind of outside of social media, outside of social media.
Yeah, that's definitely a question that we get quite a bit. So the best comparison for this is if we were to look at surveys, and what % of a response rate would you need from a survey for it to be representative? And a lot of times that'll be 10 to 15% of a population. participation in a survey will be enough to make some assumptions off of. And the group that we get questions a lot about, as far as are we representing them, is people over the age of 50. And people over the age of 50 participate in social media. Over 20% of that population participates in social media. So there's certainly enough. And just the fact that most of our data is people documenting what's going on in an area. So they're talking about, people running, or there being events going on. Even if they're the only ones posting about it, they're at least capturing it and journaling it for the rest of the people experiencing it too.
Got it. So it looks like Steve has a question. So is this supposed to replace my current site analysis process? How does this fit into other industry standard data?
So it doesn't replace the current site analysis process. There's specific go into that, like the type of format of store and things like that are still important. So we recommend using it either alongside your existing process. So if you have an internal team that can use our data, we certainly deliver it for that type of in-house analysis. And we also partner with companies like Intellytics to use this data in combination with things like demographic data to create the site analysis. So it really varies customer by customer, but it might be that we work directly with you and we give you reports to use alongside your other tools, and it might be that we partner with somebody that you're already working with.
Got it. And actually, Steve had another follow-up question. So what sort of coverage does Spatial have, assuming coverage means, type of engagement? I think you mentioned that earlier, engaging, whether it's here in the US or internationally or beyond, correct?
Yeah, we have full US coverage. So anywhere where people are posting onto Twitter, we have coverage in the US. We also have about 30 international markets as well. And we can add coverage just about anywhere in the world if a client needs it. We do that all the time.
So another question, can you just kind of re-elaborate on where Spatial's data actually comes from?
Yeah, for sure. And I can pull up that slide from earlier. So most of our data comes from Twitter and Instagram and Flickr. We use a lot of event data. That can be really useful in determining the types of experiences going on in an area. But most of it, what it looks like is people talking about what they're doing in an area. So someone might be posting about candlelight, engagements, and date night all within one block of each other. And then we can find that there's a mathematical relationship between those terms. And now we know that that's a romantic segment that we can measure across any other community.
That's awesome. So it looks like we have time for maybe one more question. Steve says thanks for the answer as well. Jimmy's asking, does Spatial track individual users? Does the data get tied to a household?
Yeah, that's a really good question and really relevant right now with things that have been in the news. We're really strict about the way that we use data, and we follow all of the guidelines from our sources of data as well. And we really closely adhere to that and are even more strict a lot of the times than we are supposed to be. So we don't collect any or use any personal information. We want to understand a community. We're not trying to understand one specific person. So we look at everything in aggregate and where it's happening, like where are these organic behaviors occurring. So it's not as much of trying to tie it to a specific person or a specific household.
Got it. So we do have one more question. This says, we already work with a real estate analytics provider. What makes Spatial different?
So we're the first company to turn social media data into a usable layer of location intelligence. And we partner with real estate analytics companies all the time. We have a partnership we're announcing with Intellytics this week. And so it's really an ideal way to work with us is if you have that partner for them to use our data and along those same lines as they would use any other source of data, or it can be a separate tool for analysis. We have customers who will use something like Buxton, and then they'll also get our reports as well, and they combine it themselves to make their decisions. So it really doesn't limit how you can work with us by already continuing to work with an analytics provider.
That's all the questions we have.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for tuning into the webinar. And like we said earlier, make sure to send us an address that you'd like to get our analysis for. And also, if you'd like to schedule some one-on-one time with some of our team to learn more, you can do that as well. All right. Thanks, everyone.